Ship traffic in Arctic waters is up 128% over the last 10 years. Russia's 54 icebreakers account for a lot of that traffic, and the United States doesn't have any polar icebreakers in the region right now. Bradley Bowman is Senior Director for the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He and his colleague Major Scott Atkinson are writing about the Arctic in Defense News. Brad, welcome. Thanks very much for coming on the program. It's striking, as you and Major Atkinson point out in this piece, that Russia and China are tremendously active in the Arctic, while the United States is trying to be but isn't able to be, basically because of a lack of hardware, is my takeaway. Is that a fair read on my part?
I think it is, sir. Thanks for the opportunity to join you. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, the chair of our center at FDD, Lieutenant General retired H.R. McMaster, often says we have to view the world not as we'd like it to be, but as it is. And that includes viewing our rivals and competitors not as we want them to be, but as they are and as they're behaving. And when I look to the Arctic, I see very concerning activity by Moscow and increasingly also by Beijing. And I think Americans need to start with an understanding that if we're going to compete successfully against Russia and China, that's not just going to be in Europe, the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East. It's got to also be in the Arctic. Why? Why? Because America is an Arctic nation. Unlike China, we are an Arctic nation. That is our homeland. Part of our homeland is in the Arctic. We have important interests there. And if we ignore that region, while Russia and increasingly China are active, we're going to become less and less safe as a result.
You write in this piece to that point about looking at the world as it is and not as we would like it to be, that the region will be experiencing ice-free summers over the next 15 to 30 years. What does that mean as far as accessibility for us? Our most important partner in this region, it strikes me, would be Canada, I imagine, and then also for our competitors, China and Russia.
No, I'm so glad you asked that, and you flagged a bit of it in your intro there. But you know, we're seeing a 128% increase in vessel traffic north of the Bering Strait over the last decade. I am not a climatologist or a meteorologist or anything like that, but there are projections that we're going to see ice-free summers over the next 15 to 30 years. And so what that means is increased commercial and military traffic, increased access to resources, and the Russians and Chinese doing more there. And when you consider that the Arctic provides an avenue of approach, or more directly, a line of attack against our homeland, that is not something we should be neutral about. And we see the Russians understanding this and putting their money where their mouth is. And America, frankly, in many cases, not completely, but in many cases, kind of missing in action. And you know, the head of our Coast Guard in the past has said, you know, if you want to be effective, you have to be present. And we are not nearly present enough in the Arctic.
The issue there primarily, as I mentioned a moment ago, is hardware.
Yes.
You write in this piece, Russia has 54 icebreakers. We don't have anywhere near that number. What's the right force structure, either Coast Guard or Navy or a combination thereof, in that part of the world, in your view?
It's a great question. I would just give your viewers one quick anecdote to kind of underscore the shortfall that the United States has in hardware. There's a Coast Guard cutter, Healy. It was America's sole medium polar icebreaker. It returned early from its patrol this year due to a motor fire. And so currently, with no forecast for a return to service, the U.S. is currently without a single icebreaker to support the Arctic. So while the ice is decreasing, no surprise to your viewers, there's still a lot of ice there, particularly in the winter. And if you can't access a region because of ice, that's going to be a problem. I mean, it really comes down to we have to be able to detect threats, we have to be able to communicate, we have to be able to operate, and we have to be able to protect. Protect what? Protect our interests, protect our sovereignty, and protect potentially against attack. And if you don't have the infrastructure, the icebreakers, the Arctic polar capable ships and submarines, you're not going to be able to do any of that. And that's why the #1 unfunded priority for Northcom is Arctic communications, because you know, I'm a former helicopter pilot. I wouldn't dare fly in some of these altitudes in the Arctic. But when you go far north, you have atmospheric conditions that make communications very difficult. And so, you know, I mentioned detecting, communicating, operating, protecting. The #1 thing our Northcom commander says he needs, the first thing he needs the next dollar spent on, is Arctic communications. That should tell your viewers something.
My apologies to your colleague, Major Adamson, for calling him Major Atkinson so far in our conversation. But you and he write, closing this piece, Moscow and Beijing appreciate the importance of the Arctic and are taking action. Washington should too. Who in Washington needs to do what? I assume that it's not just the Department of Defense and the Homeland Security Department as the Coast Guard. I imagine there's a congressional element of action required here too.
Absolutely correct. I mentioned a moment ago unfunded priorities. The Congress was wise enough to ask the Indo-Pacific Command to provide a report this year that was received this year, talking about what they most needed. And that report kind of laid out very specifically what the commander there saw as the gap between what he needed and what he has. I think it would make sense for Congress to ask for the same thing from Northern Command beyond the normal kind of unfunded priority list, to kind of lay out in detail report. That would enable more effective congressional oversight, an independent take from the Article I branch of government on, what is needed. I'm not suggesting anyone in the Pentagon or elsewhere is nefarious or malign here. We have a real tension between, America is a global power, we're Arctic power, we have interests around the world. We don't have enough resources to do everything. But as we argue in the piece, we're in danger of strategic insolvency in the Arctic. And by that, I mean there is such a gaping gap between what we should be doing and what we should have there and what we do that it's quite concerning. So a couple specifics, looking at a deep water port in Nome, Alaska, right? I mean, that would be an important step. Senator Sullivan on the Armed Service Committee has rightly pushed for that. Looking to lease or accelerate acquisition of icebreakers. Looking at other infrastructure that we might need elsewhere in Alaska, in the Aleutians and so forth. These are some examples of some additional steps that could and should be taken without delay, in my view.
Bradley Bowman, thanks very much for joining me today. It's great to have you.
Thank you, sir.